Chapter 11. Too Far. On his way back to his dorm, Theron passed by the only flashy ornament in the whole academy. It was a stele adorned with gold. This stele was the perfect credit stele. It listed the number of perfect credit students to pass from this branch of the Imperial Academy. In its many generations of existence, Thistlebrook's Imperial Academy had just 4 names of their own. 3 from the military stream and just 1 from the political stream. A so-called perfect credit graduate was a student that managed to pass all available classes in a stream with top marks. This top mark didn't refer to a perfect score, but rather the S grade. There were a total of 99 available credits and a total of 33 classes. One could receive a pass, an A, or an S when receiving a credit, and of course, a fail was also possible. A pass netted one a single credit, an A received 2, while an S received a full 3 credits. One could spend a maximum of 5 years in the academy, regardless of what age below 17 they entered. Graduating required one to accumulate 33 credits total, regardless of classes completed. You could graduate with honors if you managed to accumulate 66. Just the title of Honored Imperial Scholar was enough to net a student a great deal of opportunities after graduation. It was just that a perfect credit graduate was on another level. There were also benchmarks a student had to meet during their time here, or else one could be expelled early. Theron had joined the academy almost 6 months ago now and accumulated 4 S grades and 12 credits in that time. The benchmark for the first year was only 5 credits total, while every subsequent year was 7. So Theron certainly had quite some breathing room, but Teacher Fern had her eyes on a much bigger prize. 3 layers were working in conjunction here. First, there was Teacher Fern's enthusiasm. The second was the coming exchange with Teacher Bloom's class, but deeper than all of that was the stele of the glowing gold. 3 perfect credit graduates from the military stream, and just 1 from the political stream. Theron always did his homework, so he knew the competition between the 2 streams was stiff. The academy had 2 deans, and they were evaluated not much unlike the students. The teachers were likewise in the same boat. It couldn't be said that the perfect credit graduate was the end-all, be-all. They were too rare after all. But it certainly helped. Theron entered his room, or more accurately, his courtyard. He was treated much better as an imperial scholar than a bottom-feeding assassin. There was even a basement perfect for his training and resistant to his attacks. Without delay, Theron descended to his training room and began a night of long practice, drilling and familiarizing himself with the 3 techniques he had just exchanged for. Early the next morning, Theron walked into Teacher Fern's class, his white and violet robes as primly kept as always. With the number of points he had accumulated on his last mission, he wouldn't need to complete another for the next 3 months. That was the benefit of clearing a 3-star difficulty-rated mission. As for what would happen if he didn't, well, the mark left on the back of his hand would certainly have something to say about that. The association was a place where kind-hearted souls gathered. There was no shortage of untalented assassins who lost their lives not due to lack of trying, but lack of success. It was said the death the soul mark gave you was as excruciating as it was cruel, and Theron had no intention of becoming a living example. "Theron, over here," Sadie waved from the front row. Theron took a seat by her side with a smile. "You left in such a hurry yesterday. I was worried that you'd disappear again. Teacher Fern would have your..." Sadie hurriedly covered her mouth with both of her little hands as a familiar figure walked into the class. Teacher Fern gave her a pointed look, and the little girl could only sink into her chair, trying to hide her expression. "Today will be the exchange. I'll need someone to pair up with Theron, so we'll hold a small competition." She held up a stack of papers. "There are 2 questions on here. I will mark based on a combination of speed and accuracy." A greenish color exuded from Teacher Fern's eyes, and the papers fluttered on the wind to everyone but Theron. "Teacher, this isn't fair. Why does Theron automatically get a spot?" One of the older students stood up from the back, their face red from suppressing their displeasure. He wasn't the only one who felt this way. He was just the only one who dared to speak. The most powerful family in Thistlebrook was the family of the Marquis. This young man wasn't a member of their main branch, but he shared their last name, Thistle. He was probably one of the few who dared to directly refute a teacher of the Imperial Academy. The young man wasn't targeting Theron without cause. There were only 2 exchanges a year and 1 yearly competition. Just participating granted one a single credit, and this was already enough for students to go wild. However, if you participated and performed well, you could earn as much as 3 whole credits. This was absolutely huge. Who would want to miss out on this? Theron sighed inwardly. This should be yet another punishment. It seemed the valiant housewife hadn't had enough of scolding him. Now she wanted to turn the whole class against him. Things would have been fine if he just took the test as well. But with the order of operations flipped, there was no escaping some sort of fallout whether he won or lost. Yesterday, he didn't really mind the scolding. But this time, he felt Teacher Fern had gone too far. Chapter 12, Tabulation. Teacher Fern looked toward the Thistle descendant calmly. He was 18 years old this year and had been in the academy for 3 years. Among the students present, there were quite a number like him, students who no longer attended class as they focused on passing higher difficulty courses. To these students, the right to participate was huge. They were no longer as bright and doughy-eyed as the first years. Once you had cleared all of the basic courses, gathering more credits after 20 or so was a monumental task. These sorts of opportunities for extra credit had value that couldn't be understated. I chose Theron because he is the best option, she replied. Under what metric? I have more experience than him and double his credits. There are any number of seniors here that can say the same. The more he thought about it, the more enraged the Thistle became. This was ridiculous. Many of them had never even seen this Theron before, and they didn't know what he looked like. It wasn't until the Thistle mentioned these facts that the majority grew more incensed. What do you think, Theron? Teacher Fern asked. There was no immediate response. Theron looked down toward the long desk before him, an almost rhythmic set of thoughts going through his mind. It was the same cycle he went through every time he wanted to refocus himself, to remind himself of why he did the things he did, why he acted the way he should rather than the way he wanted to. I believe that the seniors have earned the right to compete for both spots. I am far too young and inexperienced to take on this burden. His voice was gentle, not in a timid sort of way, but a soothing one. It was the kind of voice that made it difficult to gather any ire for. Even those who had not personally met Theron before couldn't help but soften their stance. Teacher Fern frowned, not liking the answer. But there wasn't much she could do. Listening to the wishes of her students, she passed an exam paper to Theron as well. Please begin. The exam will end either after the first half of the class has finished or within the next hour. Silence fell, and the students began to work on the 2 questions. From start to finish, Teacher Fern's gaze rested on Theron. Theron pretended not to sense Teacher Fern's gaze. He wrote the entire time, and of the class of 50 or so, he was the 20th to hand his paper in. When Teacher Fern read his paper, her heart sank to rock bottom. There was nothing wrong with the response. It wasn't purposely incorrect, but it was dully average. Both answers were exactly what you'd expect an above-average first year to write. It was so stereotypical that it was almost an eyesore. And it was somehow a slap in the face in both directions. On the one hand, there was no fault that she could pick at. If Theron had written poor answers, it would be obvious he was deliberately failing. But he hadn't. On the other hand, the answers were so perfectly chosen that they looked like they came out of a grading book on what one should expect from a first year. It was so precise that it couldn't have come from anyone other than a genius. She suddenly wasn't sure what to do. By Theron's side, little Sadie was biting at her pencil, wondering if she had missed anything. The moment she heard there was going to be an exam, she became so nervous she even forgot Theron was sitting beside her. When the 24th person got up, she panicked, realizing there was only one spot left, so she hurriedly scrambled to her feet. Theron chuckled and slid out to let her pass. That concludes the exam. I will tabulate the results now. Teacher Fern tossed the papers into the air, and Theron frowned. It seemed that Teacher Fern didn't know how to take a hint. A green-tinted energy rushed out again, and the papers were all shredded to pieces, or at least, that's what Theron saw. In the eyes of the students, it looked like a nice trick of the light, as though Teacher Fern was extracting the merit of their answers from the papers. It was nothing but a trashy magic trick, but it was also one best at fooling children like them. Sadie's large green eyes lit up as she watched in awe, feeling as though she was witnessing something magical for the first time. Elemental Mancers like Teacher Fern and Theron were the closest to Soul Mancers, while Flux Mancers were closer to Spirit Mancers. Though one would usually be born with a single strong affinity, they typically had an adjacent Mancer path they could casually dabble in. Something like extracting the merit of answers from a test paper sounded exactly like what a Soul Mancer would be capable of. Teachers were also authority figures most would trust implicitly, so how could they know that Teacher Fern was lying to their faces? Theron closed his eyes, running through his checklist again. His breathing was slow, taking as much as 5 counts to inhale and exhale. That decides it, Teacher Fern said with a stern nod. The participants for this exchange will be Malaya and Theron. There wasn't much shock to the first name. Malaya was a senior who had already accumulated 52 credits. She was also 18 years old this year, and though she wasn't a thistle, she had been sent here from the Vermouth Earldom. This was also her 3rd year, so she was on pace to graduate with honors. There were 2 others in the class around her level, but neither found it unacceptable that she was named ahead of them. What wasn't expected was that Theron would still be named. Thinking about the dubiousness of the previous results tabulation, the unfriendly gazes were abound. Chapter 13, Blank. The voices were forced to die down. There were no students of the Imperial Academy that weren't intelligent. The exams were strict, and fools could neither slip through the cracks nor cheat. If Teacher Fern was going so far as to push Theron to the forefront, then she already had blinders on. There was no amount of dust they could kick up that would change things. Much the same way there were no useless students in the academy, there were likewise no useless teachers. In the case that Theron truly was worthy of this placement, there was even less reason for them to complain. None of this changed the fact that many were unhappy with how Teacher Fern had gone about doing things, and that unhappiness was naturally transferred to the youth. Many of them didn't know rather than the powerful Gold Mancer. None of them could offend. Throughout the process, Theron remained silent. Teacher Fern had expected to see some sort of reaction, but he sat there just the same. The class was brought to the exchange room. This place was little more than a theatrical court of sorts, designed with the imperial capital in mind. It was designed not much unlike a theater, if said theater's stage was surrounded by seating in all directions. The stage itself was a circular platform that followed the layout of the room, and the spectators' area was divided into 4, opening up 4 paths for entry. By the time many of the seats were filled, Theron stood behind a wide podium with Malaya, waiting for their opponents to arrive. Malaya was a frail girl. Her build was slender, and her face was lovable. Hints of her baby fat were fatting away to reveal the visage of a woman, and she was most definitely a favorite of the students. Although she wasn't a femme fatale, she had a gentle air to her. One would be hard-pressed to find someone who didn't have a fond expression of her. She fidgeted on the podium, arranging the blank pieces of paper and lining up her pens and pencils. Nothing could seem to soothe her OCD, so she shifted them again and again. After a polite greeting, the 2 partners hadn't spoken again. The exchange was meant to simulate a high-pressure situation where you might have to work with someone you weren't familiar with. Plus, the added variability of unknown questions raised the stakes. There was a slight commotion at the doors, and a new wave of students entered, led by a short old lady. She moved with vigor, although she leaned on a cane that looked carved from an ancient tree. Behind her, there were two prominent youths. Siriah Thistle, another 18-year-old third year. She had accumulated 49 credits and was well on her way to becoming an honors graduate. Benedict Gray, an earldom descendant. He had accumulated 57 credits and was in his third year. The closer one got to the top, the larger the gap that even a single credit represented. That was also why Theron's 12 credits stood out so fiercely. Teacher Bloom surprisingly didn't react with much surprise to seeing Theron on the stage. She sent her students up and took a seat, readying herself for the coming event. Murmurs and whispers soon consumed the exchange court. There were 3 18-year-olds on the stage, and one 14-year-old that stood out like a sore thumb. Theron stood with his eyes closed. If I perform poorly, it will justify their reactions and potentially increase the ire they feel for me. If I perform well, they'll understand Teacher Fern's intentions, but the resentment will still remain. It's a dead end no matter what. He had lived a quiet life in the academy thus far. If not for wanting to leave for an extended period of time, he wouldn't have completed his credits so quickly, nor caught Teacher Fern's attention. Though the valiant housewife thought she was guiding him, in reality, she was making his life worse. It wasn't just about the inconvenience of living in the limelight. Orphans like him didn't have the luxury of offending nobles, and that was exactly the fire Teacher Fern had just pushed him into. Her kindness was a detriment, and her naivete, her unconscious trust that the system would allow Theron to shine, would bring him no shortage of trouble. Despite the calm look on his face right now, Theron was more than a little displeased, but what could he do? Theron's eyes opened as a silhouette appeared at the center of the debate platform. The figure appeared in a wisp, and without a word, a gentle smile on his face. The man would be a breath of light, if such a thing made sense. His hair and beard were far too bright a shade of white to feel natural, and his skin was bronzed in vibrancy. This was the dean of the political stream, Dean Gray. Welcome, everyone. I won't waste your time with a long, drawn-out speech. Just remember to use this exchange to build your knowledge and your camaraderie. Dean Gray raised a hand, and a fluttering ball of light appeared in his palm. It rose to the ceiling and exploded in a firework, forming a line of words in what could only be described as an impeccable display of mana control. Mana is life, mana is power. These two philosophies have ruled the discourse for generations. Team Bloom will take the former, and Team Fern the latter. You have 10 minutes to prepare before the opening round begins. Malaya had already begun to write furiously, dashing through ideas. She planned to give herself 5 minutes, then spend the next 5 minutes organizing their argument with Theron. Theron gazed at the question for a moment before he looked to where Dean Gray had vanished. Then his gaze swept over the crowd. 5 minutes passed quickly, and Malaya looked down at Theron's papers with a frown. Why were they blank? Was he not preparing? Chapter 14, Shell-Shocked. Teacher Fern was quite nervous when she saw Theron's nonchalance. Her original assumption was that even if he threw a tantrum the first time around, he wouldn't continue to do so in the face of real credits, not to mention the dean. But this performance left her shell-shocked. Thinking back, did she truly know this student that well? He had been under her care for half a year and had spent at least 2 of those months away. He was quiet and never responded much to anything, always taking the path of least resistance. Rebelliousness wasn't the word she would use to describe Theron, but now she wasn't so sure. The Thistle Clan young man of Teacher Fern's class had been observing Theron from the start. The bad taste in Sawyer's mouth only grew. He was the only Thistle of Teacher Fern's class who would still participate in this, but he was nowhere near being picked. At his pace, reaching 33 credits was his limit, and it would take all 2 years he had left to accomplish it. Seeing Theron down there only stoked his inferiority complex, and he couldn't help but grip his fists. "Theron," Malaya whispered to him in a hiss. "Yes." Theron replied in a gentle cadence. "We don't have much time left. Do you have anything to add? Look at my notes." Theron sent a glance over. "It's fine." Malaya was taken aback, not sure how to react. What did he mean by that? Time is up. Team Bloom, you will begin, Dean Gray's voice echoed. Soraya cleared her throat and began. I thought that I should first begin with a definition. Mana is life is a popular phrase amongst Mancers, but life encompasses far too many things, whereas power can only be defined in a fixed lane. I believe this alone is clear enough to make the correct choice obvious, but I will continue nonetheless. Life can refer to raw biology, the configuration of elements that allow a plant to grow and a human to breathe. It can be founded on a more philosophical basis, referring to morality, the meaning of life itself, the standards one sets for themselves. It can refer even to something far more abstract, hinting at the impetus of creation itself. We would argue today that only one word could possibly encompass the true meaning of mana. She gave the crowd a smile as she finished. Malaya was in a state of panic. She had spent too much time trying to catch Theron's attention and not enough consolidating her ideas. What she didn't expect was that Theron would speak without her input. A definition is a good place to start, he began in a gentle voice, but what we define is more important. The definitions of life and power are less important than the definition of mana. Many frowned when they heard these words. Wasn't the point of life and power to act as definitions? Wasn't this circular logic? What was the point in trying to define mana if they were precisely trying to define that in the first place? Malaya almost fainted. It was inappropriate to interrupt or inject her opinion here. Refuting her partner would only make the situation worse, but that didn't stop her from feeling like an ant in a frying pan. Mana exists in two states. There is mana all around us, and there is mana in ourselves. The reason no one has decided on which definition is true, life, or power, is because no one has agreed on what question is being asked in the first place. We would argue that the question has no meaning if it does not refer to the mana in ourselves. Mana, otherwise, is an energy of the heavens, a force of nature beyond us. What is the point of deliberating on mana in this form? The question then obviously refers to mana in relation to ourselves, humans, and in this case, it can only refer to a single thing. Power. Silence fell. It was a well-thought-out answer, short and succinct, and seemed to leave no room for rebuttal. It cut to the core of the question and made many second-guess themselves. The answer Soraya gave was excellent, but why did Theron's feel like it was on another level? It was like Theron had taken a highly complex issue and distilled it down to its barest parts, and his opening statement became something that couldn't be ignored. Somehow, the battle felt over from the moment it began. Theron was right. What was the point in arguing about such an abstract concept of mana when they were just students? Even if they had dreams of grandeur, shouldn't they start by understanding mana in its simpler form? That was how their academy's curriculum was built. Often, teachers would tell lies to dumb subjects down, only to reveal the truths later on. What was even more potent was Theron's closing statement. He spent the entire time arguing that the definition of power was the simpler one and the only one they should acknowledge, until he flipped it on its head, forcing Soraya and Benedict to scrap their original closing statement. We have spoken a lot today about the importance of power as a defining characteristic of mana, but our position shouldn't be mistaken as power being the inferior definition, only useful to us all. Ultimately, power is more profound than it is given credit for. It's the most basic law of survival, the foundation of evolution and life itself. The reason it is so profound is because it is so simple. An ant does not need to understand life or even power, but it does know that it must survive, it must gather food, it must have the strength to protect itself and pass on its lineage so that its children may thrive in the coming generations. Power is the simplest and most profound truth of the world. It doesn't need to be debated upon, it just is. From the most insignificant creature to the mightiest warrior, it rules their life. If you want to one day philosophize over the meaning of life and its relation to mana, wait until you can look down on the heavens themselves. And even then, you'll only be able to because you had the power to do so. Chapter 15. Replaced. Theron, you were amazing. Sadie's little head bobbed up and down. Her eyes lit up like lanterns as she grabbed onto Theron's sleeve, waving it about. The reply was the same gentle smile. Sadie reminded Theron a lot of his little sister, so lively and full of joy. The little girl didn't realize how much trouble Theron had gotten himself into today, and it was probably for the best that she didn't know. That's right, I almost forgot. Sadie pressed a palm against her forehead. Big sis Thessa wanted me to invite you to have food with us because we let out early today. Yes, Flora is coming too. Flora and Sadie were usually attached at the hip, though Flora was the much quieter of the two. It was almost comical how opposing the two were. Sadie had red hair, Flora had black. Sadie was lively, and Flora was practically a mute. Sadie had a twin pair of pigtails, and Flora had just one ponytail. Theron made it his business to learn as much about the people around him as he could, but he didn't know much about Sadie. What was interesting was what she had said about her relation to Thessa, though. Maybe he would learn more about that today. Okay, I'll go with you. Really? Sadie's eyes went wide. Theron almost always said no, save for a few times. This was unexpected. Theron smiled. Let's go. The trio headed toward the exit, Theron seemingly oblivious to the number of eyes on him. Theron, Teacher Fern's voice called out, but Theron had already turned to her and gave her a polite bow. Apologies, Teacher Fern. I have an engagement with Sadie and Flora that's a bit time-sensitive. Maybe another day. Teacher Fern was a bit stunned, but she didn't get the chance to say anything else. Between the sea of students trying to exit and Theron's swift departure, there wasn't another chance at all. Where is he? Dean Gray looked up from his desk to find Teacher Fern standing without the student he had asked to see. Exhaling, Teacher Fern shook her head. I will take full responsibility for this, Dean. I'll have him come by and see you tomorrow. Dean Gray wasn't sure what to think at first, but seeing the conflicting emotions on this usually valiant housewife, he made some guesses. Teacher Fern's personality was well known. It wasn't the first time she had bumped heads with a student, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. What happened this time? Nothing happened, Teacher Fern said defensively. The dean didn't reply, sitting back in his chair and waiting. Teacher Fern had no choice but to give him the Cliff Notes. Though prepared, the truth still surprised him. It felt mostly benign. Was Teacher Fern thinking too much? Or did this child really have somewhere he urgently needed to be? Instead of concluding, he reached for a filed drawer in his desk and quickly found Theron's. There weren't many students enrolled at the Imperial Academy at any given time. Having a file on them all wasn't an issue. Theron Gallithunder, peculiar last name, only 14 years old, just recently turned. He passed the exam at 13, his family. The dean frowned, and his expression became more solemn. After a while, he tossed the file onto his desk, allowing it to slide toward Teacher Fern. Read it. She did as she was told. Soon, her face was flickering with shock and horror as well. An entire city, who would do such a thing? Calm down and think about the meaning. You took a boy that doesn't want to be in the spotlight and thrust him into it. He had a perfect score in his Imperial exam. Do you know what that means? How could she not? The Imperial exam didn't separate the streams. Getting just 20% right was already considered very good. Getting a perfect score meant that you could already finish the first 5 basic classes of both the military and political streams with an S grade. That put you just 3 credits from graduating, 3 credits that Theron had just earned. If his goal was to be in the spotlight, he would have long since been. This is a silly complaint. How is he going to succeed in the future if he can't handle the spotlight? It's best we get him used to it now. The dean gave Teacher Fern a level glance, and she seemed to only now realize that she was talking to an expert far beyond her. Can you not see something a child can? The academy is perfectly safe, she defended. Is it? Yes. The dean shook his head. This woman was too stubborn. Not every child needs to have their hand held, Teacher Fern. Micromanaging their every step will only stifle them, and in this case, it will lose you the right to mold them at all. This child lost his family and friends in a single tragic accident. Do you think that lightning can strike that many times in one location? Can it even do so twice, let alone thousands of times? You've seen how smart this child is. Do you think that he cannot see this? All he knows is that someone powerful is the reason he is now an orphan, and the empire and its nobles have done nothing about it. And this is the child you want to trust the system. This was the first time that the dean had heard of this incident, and that was a problem that weighed heavily on his chest as well. With his standing in the empire, how could he be out of the loop? Even the details in the report were so vague he could only draw loose, overarching conclusions. But unlike them, Theron had been there. No obfuscation was going to make him forget. And from what the dean had heard in today's exchange, he was smart enough to draw even sharper conclusions. Teacher Fern was at a loss for words, as Dean Gray stood to his feet. Dean Vermouth has been replaced by a thistle. The words seemed to have nothing to do with his first tirade, but they were still enough to make Teacher Fern react as though she had been struck by lightning. That's impossible. The imperial court would never allow a marquisate to have such power in government and in the academy. Thistlebrook was the marquisate of the Thistle clan. For them to control both the city and the academy was too much. The Nightingale imperial family had never allowed such a thing before. The dean gave her a look that said it had already happened. You look at the world from a privileged lens and you've gotten used to it. Not every student here is of great and noble birth. The more you act like they are, the less equal they become. You've brought a lot of trouble to the doorstep of this child. I would suggest you keep that in mind and proceed as such. Teacher Fern fell into silence. Chapter 16, Purple Scale Tea House. The Purple Scale Tea House was often frequented by the young nobles of Thistlebrook. It could be said that it was popular even across the empire. The waitresses were beautiful, the food was of the highest quality, and the tea, especially, was well known for its positive effects on cultivation. Theron had never been before. If not for his curiosity about the mission Thessa, Soren, and Tegan were on, he would have never come. It was impossible to enter this establishment and not spend several thousand bronzes, and that was if you were being frugal. The top floors certainly had customers spending exorbitant amounts of silver. Luckily, the group gathered together on the first floor. Soren was already waving around a leg of meat and telling a tale about how he valiantly defeated a fiend beast. And then I slid under its enormous body and ran my blade down its gut. You should have seen it. Blood and intestines were flying everywhere. I thought I was going to drown down there. Thessa rolled her eyes. Oh yeah, you cut the belly of a gray rhino that easily. Soren flexed his free arm. Haven't you seen these muscles? Are you doubting my prowess? Theron smiled, sipping at his tea. A warmth spread through him that made the obscene price tag worthwhile. His cultivation had stabilized at the fourth resonance, but it was showing signs of increasing already. The process was also gentle and soothing, nothing like the pain he had endured consuming those mid-tier pills. Thessa waved a hand, having had enough of Soren's antics. We have a real hero here, but you're taking up the air space with your nonsense. Sadie told me that you won 3 credits in an exchange today, Theron. How'd you manage it? Tegan looked over with a hint of surprise in his eyes as well, though Soren looked lost. They just happened to bring up a topic I was familiar with. I don't think I did anything special. Don't listen to him, Sadie chimed in. You should have seen the teachers' faces. They were practically latching onto his every word, just like the students. Teacher Fern was so confident in Theron that she chose him over all the seniors. Theron gave everyone a bitter smile, handing Sadie a handkerchief to wipe her mouth with. Before the little girl could be embarrassed, a snort came. The group was in a booth, not a private room. Anyone could overhear their conversation. It was just that Sadie wasn't expecting one of them to be Sawyer Thistle. Sawyer was still brooding over the missed opportunity and had come here to relax. He didn't expect that he would run into the very thing he had been trying to avoid all the while. If Sadie had just been praising Theron, that was fine. But what were the odds of him walking by just as she mentioned the seniors? Sawyer was followed by 2 others, and to Theron's surprise, they too wore sect garbs. Since when did so many sect members frequent the city? "Watch your mouth, brat," Sawyer snarled. The happy atmosphere deflated like a balloon. "Hey." Tegan pulled Soren back before his mouth got him into trouble. Soren wasn't one to pay attention to details, but Tegan and Thessa both had already noticed that while the Academy's insignia was on Sawyer's right hip, on his left there was the emblem of the Thistle Marquisate. It was a hint of green and brown that stood in stark contrast to the white and violet. The image of a vine of thorns restraining a heart was as clear as day. Branch bloodline or not, the influence the Thistle clan had in their marquisate was too high. Sadie shrank back, hiding behind Thessa's shoulder. Sawyer snorted again, about to walk away when he caught a glimpse of Theron. There was something about the young boy's calmness that truly pissed him off. He flicked a finger, and a brownish energy cracked against Theron's cup, sending the expensive tea flying everywhere. The green-tinted liquid dripped down onto Theron's lap, soaking his robes through. He looked down at himself, his expression unreadable. Slowly, he closed his eyes. A familiar cycle of remembrance ran through his mind. He focused his intention and will, soothing himself. Seeing that he wasn't going to get another reaction, Sawyer finally swaggered off. Most wouldn't dare to attack at all in the tea house, but most weren't thistles. "Are you all right, Theron?" Thessa asked with concern. "I'm sorry that happened." Theron opened his eyes and smiled. "No, it's fine. Not a big deal." His mana circulated, and the tea that soaked his lap was pulled up, streaming into his mouth. It was a nice party trick that lightened the mood, but Thessa's eyes couldn't help but light up. "Your cultivation is low, but your mana control is so impressive." "It's the best path for me," Theron explained. "Water Mancers aren't very powerful in combat, so I've always focused on other things." Thessa nodded. "I try to tell this one all the time," she pinched at Sadie's cheeks. "Power isn't everything. Maybe she'll take it better hearing it from you." "Blech," Soren scoffed. "If it's not related to power, it's boring. I can't believe this, days and no action at all. I'd rather return to the sect. I'm sorry, Theron, but I think I'd rather die than be a Water Mancer. How would I have defeated the Grey Rhino otherwise?" "Days and no action," Theron probed instead of refuting. "Yeah, we told you we were on this super annoying mission, right? But it doesn't feel like that at all. We're just lounging around all day." "I did think that was a bit weird," Theron nodded. "I thought that sect disciples couldn't leave." This was common knowledge, so Theron wasn't afraid to mention it. In fact, doing so would help him steer the conversation a bit better. "Normally that's true," Soren confirmed. "But this time there were a bunch of weird missions the sect handed out. We're not even the only ones." "Weird missions," Theron smiled. "Like saving cats from trees." Thessa laughed. The mighty Rhino Slayer reduced to catching house pets. Now that would be a grand tale. Soren seemed to realize that Theron was making fun of him, and he looked at the young boy in shock. "No way. You're not allowed to make fun of me too, Theron. I thought we were on the same side. Am I safe from no one?" "You're an easy target," Sadie chimed in, finally recovering from the earlier conflict. "Oh gods, even the little girl is getting involved. Save me some face, will you? We aren't saving cats from trees, damn it. This is real official business." The conversation continued, and Theron didn't manage to steer it back toward the topic of missions. That said, he still had come up with a faint inkling now. If he was correct, the mission itself wasn't important at all. Rather, for some reason, the sect wanted a large number of its disciples stationed in the city for the time being. The real question was, why? Chapter 17, Storm. Theron pressed his hand against a familiar dirty mirror. With a flash, he appeared within a room of stone. It looked no different from the way he had left it. However, he hadn't come here for this. He left his room, walking down the long corridors to the common area. "I would like to take a look at any newly available missions, please," Theron spoke in his gentle voice to the man behind the counter. The old man gave Theron an additional look, surprised to see him back so soon. Now that he thought about it, Theron wasn't particularly injured after returning, which didn't make much sense. Of course, he didn't know that Theron spent much of his newly acquired funds on healing himself. If he came back with the wound Merchant Greycoat had left on his back, he would never hear the end of it from Teacher Fern, not to mention potentially exposing himself. The old man nodded and pulled out a jade, sliding it forward. He had seen youths like Theron before, workaholics that insisted on grinding themselves to an early grave. It wasn't his place to say much. This time, though, he had misunderstood Theron. Originally, the young Water Mancer hadn't had any intention of returning for at least 2 months, but the oddities surrounding the sect had caught his attention. If he was correct, there might already be new missions related to this matter. The last time Theron had checked the missions was before he left Thistlebrook to kill Merchant Greycoat. As expected, he found something that caught his eye quickly. 3-star bronze mission, kill Yanowai Thistle. Reward: 22,000 bronzes. With the title, there was a flash of an image and a brief description of the target's cultivation. This Yanowai was in the 8th resonance. His cultivation might as well have been the last thing Theron cared about. The first thing that jumped out was his last name. It wasn't that the daggers of the night never targeted nobles, but it was very rare. The second was the reward. It was surprisingly low considering the risk. The only explanation was that there was a good opportunity in the near future that lowered the difficulty. The reward was set based on a coordination between the client and the association. If the client was doing some of the legwork as well, then the price could be negotiated down. Well, this was just speculation on Theron's part, from observing the descriptions of thousands of missions in his short tenure. The third was probably the most shocking even still, and that was the fact he recognized this person. Theron's memory was excellent, and he forced himself to have an attention to detail most wouldn't. He knew that he was walking a fine line of life and death just by being associated with this assassin's guild, so he had no other choice. For exactly that reason, he was certain that this Yanowai was one of the 2 who entered the tea house with Sawyer earlier today. Theron forced himself to look around for longer, checking through the other missions one by one. "I will take this mission," Theron spoke as he pulled back his perception. The Yanowai mission had been toggled to the top of the memory jade, so the old man knew exactly which one he was referring to. Not saying much, the old man pulled the memory jade back and slid Theron a new one. "Your badge." Theron complied and handed his identification over. Missions couldn't be accepted casually. There were penalties for failing, and in the most egregious cases, there was a death penalty. This latter case would only happen if you failed 3 missions in a row, though. 3-star bronze mission, kill Yanowai Thistle. Reward: 22,000 bronzes. Details: the target is in the 8th resonance, specializing in wood mancy. His strongest abilities are his restraint skill, thorny fields, and his defensive skill, thistled bark. The weakness of the latter is that it restricts movement speed a great deal, which is why it is such a good pairing with thorny fields. If you can find a way to limit or eliminate thorny fields entirely, using a speed advantage to win should not be a problem. Fire Mancers are the best option. The intricacies of thistled bark allow it to. Thorny fields is. The target will be inebriated every Friday evening at the Purple Scale Tea House of Thistlebrook City for the next month. These nights will be the best times to act. The wave of information came in torrents, but once again, it wasn't the information itself that shocked Theron so much. This detailed breakdown of thorny fields and thistled bark. Was there anyone but another thistle who could give such detailed information? This is why I joined this association. In the Empire, the best information network on the surface was Nightingale Pavilion. Not only did they sell treasures and techniques, but they were a strong information center as well. But how could the Nightingale Pavilion ever provide any information that would be detrimental to the nobles and the imperial clan? Daggers in the Night was different. Over the years, how many tidbits of information exactly like this had the association accumulated? If on the surface Nightingale Pavilion was the best information network, then in the dark it was this very Assassin's Guild. Even with all this information, it still ranked as a 3-star. 3-star missions were the highest rank per given level. The Merchant Greycoat mission was a 4-star difficulty, but this was because of the number of times it had failed. This 4th star was reserved for missions that had been taken up and failed at least 10 times. For a new mission, 3-star was the absolute highest. Now that Theron had the information he wanted, though, he had no intention of completing the mission. The risk was too high. What he had really wanted was the chance to see the information on the other side. That and now, he had an extra piece to the puzzle. The sect had suddenly sent so many disciples here, and now one of them was a target for assassination. There was definitely a storm brewing. Chapter 18. No longer. Theron walked back to the academy with large strides the following morning, his thoughts churning. After killing Merchant Greycoat, he had left in a hurry. Had he known that there was such a conspiracy behind the consecutive failures that preceded him, he would have definitely been more thorough. Now, before he had even dealt with this problem, Teacher Fern had thrust another into his lap with her impulsiveness, and beneath all of that, there seemed to be yet another storm brewing related to the sect. Yanoai's mission was the only one he had gotten the full details of, but there were several other eyebrow-raising missions in the recent selections. The real question was, how could he best take advantage of this? There was always opportunity in chaos, and Theron's top priority was raising his cultivation realm as quickly as possible. But there seemed to be enough danger to put him in the eye of a storm he might want to get out of. The fact the association was so quiet about Merchant Greycoat's death, even though this would supposedly bring trouble to him, was the more concerning. Theron's steps came to a sudden stop. He looked up to find Sawyer blocking his path, and he couldn't help but frown inwardly. Was this Thistle really so insistent on continuing to bother him? Was this bullying? These sorts of childish games were the kind Theron had no time for. In fact, he was beginning to resent Sawyer for being so carefree. He took a breath, tuning out what Sawyer was likely saying and recalling the same reminders again and again. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you." Sawyer's voice cut through with a wave of mana that forced Theron out of his trance. The young man was already close to Silver Mancy. Comparatively speaking, Theron was far too weak before him. A hand reached out and grabbed Theron's collar. The forcefulness made Theron's inner organs quake. The air being sapped from his lungs, as he was almost lifted from his feet. Sawyer was much older, and thus much taller than Theron. However, they looked eye to eye right this moment, Theron's toes barely grazing the ground. It was rare for such a confrontation to happen in the Imperial Academy. The fact it was happening right at the gates only made it all the more eye-catching. "You think you can just walk by without greeting your seniors? Who do you think you are?" Theron's icy blue eyes met Sawyer's. At the moment, they were as tranquil as the calm surface of a lake. Despite the pain racking his body, what fury there might have been had long been buried. He could still remember the last look in each one of their eyes, imprinting themselves like droplets of rain, soaking his soul. He was not living for himself, for his vanity, for his pride. He was living for a purpose much higher than that. When his goals were achieved, he could return and raise the Thistle clan to the ground if that was what he so desired. But right now, he had no desires. "How dare you?" A furious voice echoed like thunder. It rang like a bell, and one could almost see the phantom image of a rolling pin waving in the air. Teacher Fern stormed over, and the ground rumbled. "Unhand him, now." Blood began to leak from Sawyer's ears. It was clear that as loud as her voice was, it was targeted and focused nonetheless. Sawyer released on instinct. As close as he was to silver Mancy, he was no match for a true gold Mancy cultivator. Theron landed steadily and took a step back. Do you know how hallowed this ground is? Do you have no respect for your own face as a senior, bullying your own junior? Do you have no thought for the rules of this academy? Sawyer shook, feeling one part disarmed, another fearful, and yet another humiliated. Teacher, this. You dare to speak back to me. I'm stripping you of 3 credits. What? Sawyer's eyes practically bulged out of his sockets. Silence. The suppressive aura of a gold Mancer pressed down on Sawyer so fiercely he almost kneeled. If not for her last bit of rationality, Teacher Fern truly would have gone so far. 3 credits, and your rights to become an honors graduate have been stricken. You'll be under house arrest for the next week. Go. Sawyer's body trembled, and he clenched his fists. But unable to do anything, he could only walk away. He had never been close to graduating with honors to begin with. He was in his 3rd year, but he only had 25 credits that had just become 22. This was the largest blow by far. For one's first year, you had to accumulate 5 credits to stay on track. But for the subsequent years, the bare minimum was 7. 3 credits was almost half of what most would be able to accumulate in a year. The worst part was that even though Sawyer was well ahead of this pace, the speed of accumulating credits plummeted the more you gathered. The classes became harder, and the grading became stricter. Losing 3 credits suddenly only put his 3 credits ahead of the minimum 19 he would need to pass the 3rd year, and half the year was already finished. The loss of these 3 credits might not harm him for the 3rd year, but it might be the reason he failed the 4th year or maybe his 5th year. This is the Imperial Academy, Teacher Fern growled, scanning the students. This isn't your personal backyard, and it's a place where your own merits weigh the most heavily. You are the future of the Empire's government and military. If you act like this now, how will the people trust you with their lives in the future? Teacher Fern swept a glance over Theron that made his own flicker. He sensed several things in that gaze. Guilt was the main one, but there was a surprising hint of helplessness and resignation. The next day, Theron found out why. Teacher Fern was no longer teaching his class. Chapter 19, Creed. Theron sat in class. He was silent, but then again, so was everyone else. In this place, no matter how unruly you were as a student, there was only one person allowed to speak. Which of these youths would willingly get on the bad side of a gold Mancer, much less a thistle? The old man at the helm of the classroom looked as though he had a foot in the grave. His manner of speaking was mind-numbingly slow and labored, and unlike the vigorous Teacher Fern, he didn't use the board much at all, seemingly too weak to walk around as often as he would need to. Teacher Burn Thistle, he had introduced himself as. But ever since he had spoken those words, Theron had heard nothing else but blaring warning signs. He was in danger. While he hadn't been an assassin for long, Theron had always had a rigorous attention to detail. Teacher Fern was gone, only to be suddenly replaced by a thistle. He had already noticed that there were large movements within the Imperial Academy. Before, he wasn't sure why. But now. Someone big has been replaced. For Teacher Fern to lose her job when she had long secured tenure requires someone with heavy influence. In all likelihood, one of the deans has been replaced. More accurately, one of the deans has been replaced with a thistle. The sects were moving, and now there was such a large change in the Imperial Academy of all places. On top of that, a bounty had been placed on the head of a thistle. Even the Imperial clan wouldn't lightly target a marquisate. And now, thanks to Teacher Fern, Theron had likely been thrust right into the middle of this spotlight. The sects sent their disciples, and now the thistles are in the Imperial Academy. Both are related to a high concentration of young talent. This matter must be related to something that only the youth can accomplish. A secret realm is the most likely scenario, but that answer feels too cheap. Something is off about it. Theron continued to stare at Teacher Burn Thistle. He looked no different from a studious student. If it really was a secret realm, Why would the Thistles feel the need to take control of the Imperial Academy? Why not just keep the information close to their vests and act accordingly? This has to be something happening on a larger scale. A secret realm is too acute, likely something occurring over a long period as well, and also something so important that the Thistles are willing to directly offend the Imperial clan in order to carve out a chance for themselves. The moment he began his deductions, Theron knew that he wouldn't be able to reach a conclusive ending. He was too small a character, and while he had joined Daggers of the Night for the information network, he had yet to properly work his way up to make use of it. So he had no choice but to take a chance. 3-star bronze mission, kill Yanowai Thistle. Reward: 22,000 bronzes. Originally, he hadn't wanted to take this mission. The risk was too high, but now there was no other choice. If he didn't take the initiative himself, he would be one of the first targeted in this new world order. Student Theron. Yes, Teacher Thistle, Theron replied without missing a single beat, his tone laced with the utmost respect. I am new, but I have heard of your great feats already. I believe the class would love to hear your perspective on this topic. What do you think? I believe that one's weapon of choice should be secondary to their Mancer path. Whether elemental, flux, spirit, or soul, only by first grasping your strengths in each field can you make an appropriate assessment for yourself. Oh, Byrne continued to speak in his slow cadence. But of these 4 paths, only Flux Mancers seems to have any direct correlation with weapons. Are you saying that only Flux Mancers, masters of the body, should use weapons? No, Theron shook his head. I do not know much about spirit and soul mancy, but what I can say as a Water Mancer myself is that a great sword would not suit me very much. That being said, it might be an excellent weapon for an Earth Mancer who tends to stay more stationary in combat and would better take advantage of a bulkier weapon. A fascinating perspective, indeed, taking into account the kind of battle style most suited to your Mancy path and choosing your weapon. Would anyone else like to contribute their thoughts? A coincidence? Theron thought to himself. No, this man is a spirit Mancer. He read the intentions of my mind and felt that I wasn't giving the lesson my full and undivided attention. There was a rage that threatened to build in Theron's chest. This was the first time since that day that he was running into a spirit Mancer. His emotions, ones he usually controlled so well, showed signs of slipping from his grasp. But just like always, he slowly closed his eyes. The same thoughts and memories he always ran through came in one after another. I'm not living for myself. Those simple 5 words were his creed, and he would live by them. Theron opened his eyes to find a smiling pair looking right at him. He could practically see Teacher Byrne Thistle's amusement dancing in his green irises, his old features twisted by age and wrinkles. There was only a calm tranquility in Theron's own, as the rest of the class seemed like a blur to him. When he stepped out, his strides long, his every step carried a rhythmic cadence that aligned his movements with his heart. It was a state he felt he could only enter when there was heavy rain, but today he felt filled with purpose. He was going to kill a thistle. Chapter 20, Malaya Vermoose. Malaya stood on the corner of a cobblestoned path, fidgeting with her dress. She wrung her small hands again and again, her anxiety practically spilling out of her like water from a spout. Her hand reached into her purse, pulling out a small handkerchief and dabbing at her nose and forehead. She never wore makeup, but today she had foolishly gone and tried it. Now she was worried about it smearing down her face. The weather wasn't particularly hot, and the sun was about to set, but it might as well have been a sauna around her. She had never been asked out on a date before, much less by a young man 3 years younger than she was. She had said yes before she even understood what was happening, and now it was too late to escape. The thought of disappointing Theron filled her with even more anxiety than she was already drowning in. Did she like him? Was this love? Steam came out of her ears, the ridiculous spiral of thoughts almost making her pass out. A hand caught her as she stumbled back. Are you all right? Theron had appeared at some unknown time, a light smile on his face. Malaya opened her mouth to respond, but nothing but an odd squeak came out. All of a sudden, she wanted to find a place to bury her head, only barely managing to keep her wits about her for long enough to realize Theron's chest was not the place for that. With a push, Theron helped Malaya stabilize herself. He glossed over the odd sound she made as though he hadn't heard anything. "I'm happy you came to accompany me tonight. Shall we go?" he asked politely. "Ah, yes, right." Malaya looked toward the ground and nodded, tightly holding onto her purse with both hands. On the way to their destination, maybe because Theron was good enough at making idle chatter to distract her, Malaya managed to forget about her embarrassing display for a moment. It wasn't until they had entered the purple scale tea house and were arranged a place to sit that the gravity began to settle in once again. Theron asked for a menu, as though it was only natural. "Would you like me to order for you?" Malaya didn't know what to say. Yes, but that seemed like a very wait, weren't they on a date? Was it natural then? No, but... Steam came from her ears. She was doing so well, but then this guy came and asked her such a loaded question. What was she even doing here? Her marriage wouldn't be up to her to decide anyway. Her father would probably kill her and Theron just for being here. And wasn't it a bit late for a date? The sun was already setting. No, it was set now. Was this what teenagers got up to? It couldn't be that Theron was expecting something else for tonight, right? What should she say if he invited her somewhere else? "My apologies, it seems I overstepped. Here." Theron waved to a waitress after handing his menu over to Malaya. "Can I have another menu, please?" Malaya found her breathing returning to normal. The two of them ordered their food and tea, and soon Malaya found herself forgetting again. "I have heard a lot about the Vermouth earldom. One of our deans is a Vermouth, if I recall correctly, so I've always had quite some respect for them," Theron said with a smile. "Ah," Malaya sighed, "that's unfortunately not the case. My uncle had his position relieved by the crown." "Oh," Theron's brows raised with surprise. "Do you? I probably shouldn't ask that question, forgive me." "It's not a big deal. My uncle was quite old, and it was about time a new face was given a chance to lead. Former Dean Vermouth was the head of the military department, but it's been a very long time since we've had any true elites of the military stream. There's been some unrest recently, and now isn't the time for a lull like this. There should probably be some pretty big changes in the coming days, mostly to the military stream." "I see," Theron nodded slowly. "Do you have any thoughts of doing both, Theron?" Malaya took the initiative to ask a question. Theron was startled. "Both? You already have 12 credits. Well, no, you actually have 15 now, right? As a first year, that's amazing. I've heard of geniuses like you before. There's one in Maine Academy who had 32 credits as a first year. 16 from the academic stream and 16 from the military stream. I actually think you can do it." It took a while for Theron to regain his calm. He didn't expect Malaya to have such a fiery side to her. Theron chuckled. "I'm just a Water Mancer. The military stream probably isn't for me." "Ah," Malaya seemed to realize she had gotten a bit excited. Indeed, it would be tough for a Water Mancer to make a name for themselves in the military stream. "Is that a dream of yours?" Theron asked. Well, I've thought about it, but I don't think I'm cut out for fighting either," Malaya said sheepishly. "Ha, you must have a lot of faith in me. I appreciate the kind words of encouragement." Malaya blushed. About this, Theron, my marriage. You see, I'm not at liberty to, She had begun to speak before she could think, and now she found herself halfway through without a destination. She knew she had to say the words, but now the embarrassment was overwhelming her again. As she was stumbling over herself, there was a rustling at the door, a bell at the top of the frame releasing a delicate chime as a group walked in. Usually, such a thing would be left to a shoddy establishment, but in the purple scale tea house, it felt like their souls were being tickled. Sawyer and Yanoi Thistle had appeared. "Hello!"